Let's chat on our Living Well feature on this one. We throw this word around, as I've been mentioning, like maybe when you dislike someone, but we really don't know what it means when you say someone is narcissistic. With the social media trends and talk about toxic relationships, this term has lost its real meaning. Today, we're going to zoom into what is narcissistic personality disorder, also known as NPD, which is much more than just about selfies or someone talking a little bit about themselves a bit too much, that it makes you uncomfortable and creates some form of discomfort in you. It's actually a serious mental health condition that shapes how someone sees themselves and how they actually relate to others. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, NPD is defined by a persistent pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and the most worrying part is the lack of empathy. How do you tell the difference between everyday narcissism and someone more serious in terms of just how they see themselves? Sometimes we mistake confidence with narcissism. Well, Sindiso is going to join us. That's Sindiso Mailula, who is a clinical psychologist. Welcome on the show, Sindiso.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you doing? It's hump day,
I'm
so
good.
we just close to the weekend again.
Yeah. We're ready. We're ready.
Let's talk a little bit about this. As I mentioned, we throw this word around very easily in a way to
Yeah.
maybe mock others, or maybe when we are, gossiping about that confident friend of ours. But narcissistic personality disorder is pretty serious.
Yes, it's extremely serious. Just to frame the conversation, I had a conversation with a psychiatrist about 3 weeks ago, and she was saying in her entire career of 20 years, she's only diagnosed two people with NPD. But given, like you were mentioning, the social media trends, the whole mental health awareness thing that's come about in society, we throw that term loosely around, whereas it really is such a complex disorder. It's a personality disorder, and the diagnosis of such a disorder is a very lengthy process. So I want to caution the listeners against using those terms, because it really become a buzzword and we don't necessarily understand the depth of it and what it really
What does it mean?
means. So it's complex, like I said, right? It's centered around grandiosity. So the name narcissistic personality disorder, or rather the narcissist part of it, comes from Greek mythology, where apparently at some point, a long time ago, there was a man who used to go to the river quite a bit, and he ended up seeing, his reflection on the water, and he became infatuated with himself in essence. So that's where the whole concept of it comes about, right? And in our space, then someone who would then be, classified or be given the diagnosis of NPD is someone who's really taken on this grand persona, someone who is the center of attention, someone who manipulates. So the lack of empathy and manipulation is a big part of narcissism, right? So it's almost as if someone who's got this disorder is someone who has experienced a bit of trauma in their lives, or things that they're ashamed of, things that they have guilt centered around, and they try to hide that or compress that, right? And then they bring up this persona of that, I'm this grand, I'm this, I'm that, and they don't really consider the people around them. So these are people who lure you in. You'll find that you fell in love with this man or this woman, and for the first 6 months it was absolute bliss. So they lured you in, they gave you all the attention in the world, and one day everything just changed. So you're no longer the most beautiful girl in the world. If anything, as you're leaving the door, it's like, did you see how you're dressed? Do you think you look beautiful in that? Come on, that's shameful. So then it becomes all of these passive aggressiveness. It can even get to a point where it becomes physically and psychologically abusive as well. But it's a turn in character based on where they're at. So it's almost as if there's a switch that happens in personality,
Mm-hmm.
and someone that you've known and loved then becomes something else that you don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like the character in Snow White, the villain of Snow White, the evil queen. You know, she was always obsessed with how she looked at herself in a mirror. And she had this kind of delusion that no one else could be more beautiful than her. And there was a period in time when the mirror said, no, 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 you're no longer the most beautiful. Actually, there's a beautiful girl called Snow White. She's taken over. And that created a whole lot of chaos. But the question is, how do you know that it's just self-confidence and not something like narcissism?
So first of all of us walking the earth have traits of narcissism. In fact, all of us have traits of some sort of personality or mental health disorder. The idea behind it is that obviously, like I can look at myself in the mirror one day for a good 10 minutes or 20 minutes. That doesn't mean that I'm narcissistic, right? I can be manipulative in how I do things. I can gaslight people in my life, but that doesn't mean that I am, abusive or I'm narcissistic in any way. However, it is so the first thing also to note that even a narcissist in how they show up, they are basically guarding themselves. I love the reference that you've made with regards to the fairy tale, in that the mother had to protect herself and she had built this idea of being the most beautiful person on earth, and the idea of there being someone else who's more beautiful than her was a threat to her, right? So because someone who's got NPD is someone who's, like I've said, has experienced some sort of pain and trauma, and they're trying to hide something, that becomes their coping mechanism. Right. So we all have the traits. That's the first. We all have some sort of traits. It could be manipulation, could be gaslighting. At some point in your life, you've gaslighted someone. At some point in your life, you have manipulated someone. The one thing that differentiates you and someone with NPD is that it's a consistent action, right? This is something that consistently is happening. But also they take joy and pride in doing that. So they are aware that, okay, at this point I'm inflicting harm on this person. They may not know where it comes from or where the reaction comes from, but they are aware of that and they continue to do that, right? Whereas someone who doesn't have a personality disorder is able to reason, is able to come back and apologize. Someone with NPD would never question that they have NPD, because that's not even a thought that would come up. So if you are sitting and at some point you think, hey, my partner has said that I do this and this, perhaps maybe I've got this thing. If you're thinking like that, there's a very, high likelihood that you don't have NPD, because someone with that personality disorder does not even see anything wrong in how they are showing up and how they're treating the people around them. In fact, that's just who it is. If you can't tolerate it, then, too bad.
Yeah.
That's why people who in corporate have such bosses, they end up leaving and the boss will sit in the meeting and say, well, that's just how it is. You try and speak to your partner to say, this hurts me, I don't like it, I don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, you're very sensitive, maybe you need therapy. In fact, if you're suggesting that I go for help, how's about you go? Because you're rather drunk.
All right. I want us to take a bit of a break and unpack a little bit. Then how do you help someone who's in denial? That's the next question to ask there. Cindy, so stay there on the line.
The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
The story that takes us to Zambia. There are two men actually that were sentenced to prison for the plot to kill the president with witchcraft. You go like, what? So these guys were arrested actually in Lusaka, and what was found on them was a live chameleon. Can you believe that? Animal tails and bottles of concoction. That law takes us back to 1914, which is the Witchcraft Act. I can imagine now arrested and they go to jail for the next 2 years. I presume that when you get to jail, they get to ask you actually, what is it that you committed? Now, this is the first of its kind, by the way, for somebody to be arrested for such. They in Pemba, whenever they pass, hey, Chikanga, hey, Uloya, hey, Mulosi. And imagine here I am in these early hours of the mornings, I get to talk about witchcraft.
Saturday and Sunday mornings belong to the Morning Switch. 3 to 6 a.m. Central African Time. Channel Africa and you have got something in common. The thirst for knowledge.
Hey, we seem to Sindiso Mailula, who is a clinical psychologist, on our Live Well conversation, speaking around narcissistic personality disorder. And we're breaking that myth of you just calling anyone narcissistic is actually not good. Narcissism is actually a painful experience. Cindy, so you were saying before the break that, you know, the person who is narcissistic doesn't know that they are. They probably think it's like a sense of self-confidence, and it's good for them, and it's good for their own survival, because it feels like maybe they are always on survival mode and defending themselves in different scenarios. Then how do you point it out in a way that actually shows them that they've got something that's really wrong?
It's rather hard. I mean, I'd love to hear around, you know, successful stories of people who've been able to get that point across. A lot of narcissistic relationships end in breakups, whether it be friendships, whether it be parents, whether it be a work relationship as well. That's why people go non-contact with their parents or, you know, loved ones, because there's simply no way of getting through to them. This is someone who has just convinced themselves that nobody understands them, that nobody will ever, you know, fully grasp what it means to be them. And again, what I want to point out, every behavior fulfills a positive intention for the person doing it, right? Whether it's conscious or unconscious. So because that is the response to life in general, doesn't mean that they are just inherently bad. You know, there's a saying that goes around that narcissists aren't born, they are made, which suggests that in their formative years, there are things that happen that, you know, create this persona that then becomes larger than life or larger than experiences, which is, it's just coping mechanisms. But it's very hard to get through to a narcissist and make them see that they actually have an issue. So a lot of those relationships really are just, hey, you just accept it for what it is. There's not much that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
Unless the person, you know, you do get through to them, you have someone that they trust, who they can listen to, and they go for extensive therapy, they go on medication, and you know, they work with someone to continuously work on whatever has led them to that. But the focus really is more on the recipient of the pain.
Yeah.
Of a narcissistic relationship. That's really where people leave themselves or find themselves at a place where they don't know themselves anymore. You know, because you're questioned consistently. Your identity is questioned. Your capabilities are questioned. You know, your appearance is questioned. So you end up leaving the relationship with a sense of, who am I? And a lot of people will stay in those relationships because they start to believe what this person is saying about them. Even them, they need extensive, you know, therapy and coaching and just assistance to say, hey, this happened, you know, this was said, but it is not an absolute truth. So you'll find that in a lot of recovery therapy that we'll do with them, we have to confront limiting beliefs that have been created or have come about as a result of this relationship with this person, and confront whether or not they're absolute truths, because this person has made you believe that you're not good enough because one day they came back and you hadn't, you know, cooked their steak the way that they liked it. And that persisted to be, you know, remember that day when you didn't, I told you not good enough. That's why you can't do this.
Ish.
So that is about your go-to, you know, just as you're about to go to an interview, reminded of a time when you didn't do the steak well. And so you start to question yourself, right? So a lot of recovery therapy is centered around, who were you before you entered into this relationship, or before you realized this effect or this manipulation that was happening on a continuous basis.
That's interesting that you say that, because then how do you intervene with someone who has narcissistic tendencies? Is there treatment for this?
Yes, there is. So again, I mean, we have quite limited time, but there is different types of narcissists, right? There are narcissists who will become physically abusive. So this can go all the way to, you know, sexual molestation and just evidently hurting people for the sake of it, right? That's a rather very, very, very extreme case of narcissism, and that obviously is probably, you know, influenced with a few other personality disorders that are involved in that. But someone with just NPD, so there are people who will get, you know, I think the idea would be to find someone whom is probably outside of the relationship to speak to this person. Because if I speak to you and you and I are in a relationship and you have seen me as your enemy and you are now fighting me and you are telling me what I am and what I'm not, ideally I would then try and find someone who, someone you respect, someone you trust, someone who can get through to you, to say, perhaps let's consider going to, a therapist, or let's consider seeing a psychiatrist just for an assessment and see if there's any, chemical imbalance and if there's anything that needs to be done. That could be a route, but it can get to a place where things are rather violent and just very uncomfortable for the next person.
Mm-hmm. How do we also respond to narcissists? What's the healthy way?
Is there a healthy way? I'd say just walk away. Walk away.
Come on. Tell me something better than that.
No, definitely. I think it's the consistent working on yourself, right? Because if you're in a relationship and someone is making you feel you're being gaslighted every single day, you're being questioned, you're being manipulated, and you are slowly seeing yourself losing yourself.
But outside of the a relationship framework, I mean, what do family members, when they see this person continuing to do this, how do they respond to them? Because it's not everyone who's going to walk away from someone who has this problem.
No, definitely. So you start putting up coping mechanisms in the sense that you become aware of their patterns, right? So someone with NPD is someone who, like I said, they'll change. So they either really happy engaging with everyone and based on what they want at the time. So manipulation is in play, right? If we're saying we have a family gathering and we know that if we don't do what this person wants us to do, we kind of tiptoe around them to ensure that they don't explode in front of us. So you do what we call emotional regulation. So you kind of have a calibration of this person's emotions, and if I say this, you'll start ciphering conversations to have with the person, right? So if you want to address something, you need to address it in such a way that they don't feel threatened. Because remember, they are hiding the guilt and shame of whatever has happened to them, and they want to consistently seem like they have things in order and they are this and they are that. So that means having conversations with them is you frame things in a way that is beneficial for them and not for you, because at the end of the day, you don't really matter, right? They matter. Going to address something, say, hey, when you do this and this, have you considered perhaps how it looks to other people, like just from a reputation point of view? Have you considered how people will view that if we as a family show up in that way? And like, oh yeah, actually. But if you go there and say, how do you think I feel when you do that? I don't care how you feel. All I care about is how I feel.
Crazy.
So you center conversations, so you center conversations in a way that is beneficial for them, right? And remembering that the key principle here is that no one will ever deny or fight anything that's going to help them. And again, this is kind of something people don't realize, even in general conversation and relationships, even with people who don't have personality disorders, is that if you want to get a point across, get a point across in a way that the next person understands how, if they, buy into this idea or, listen to you, how does it benefit them?
Okay. We have to leave it there. We've run out of time, Cindy. So this is such an interesting one, because I'm thinking, hey, am I not a narcissist myself, Because you're like, because narcissists don't know that they're not narcissists. It's like, let me go get help.
If you're questioning that, chances are you're not. If now you're thinking, hey.
Yeah, because we all make those mistakes, silly mistakes, where you say something, it can be misconstrued. Maybe you have a sense of self-awareness, So it's a very interesting one, and I think we all have to investigate ourselves on this one. And I think it's important to ask the question for yourself, just to make sure that you are not one. But thank you for helping us on this one. Thank you, Sindiso.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find you online? Sorry, I didn't mention that.
No worries. So on Instagram, I am Sindiso_JR, which is junior. My personal number is 063-631-6767.
All right. Thank you so much. That's Sindiso Mailula, who is a clinical psychologist.